Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Career Corner, where we answer your career cues. I'm your host, Lukas Kauffman, and we have a very exciting episode today. Today, we are joined by Sam Elibiary and Ian Woods to talk about their time in the Peace Corps. Sam and Ian, welcome to the Career Corner.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Lukas.
First question that I think a lot of people might have, or maybe not, it might just be me. What is the Peace Corps?
Go ahead,
And whoever
Sam.
wants to take a crack at it.
Sure. The Peace Corps is an arm of the federal government that allows volunteers to go and serve in a number of countries around the world. I think definitely more than 50 countries, maybe up to 70 or 80 countries around the world in different sectors, including education, health and water sanitation, agriculture, teaching, maternal health and clinics. It's a 27-month commitment, and contrary to what some people believe, it's not necessarily about peacekeeping. So it's not military related at all. It's not in conflict zones or anything like that. Rather, it's an exchange of knowledge and culture, and for volunteers to share with their host countries and communities particular skills or expertise that they might have from education or other work experience.
Amazing. Did she miss anything, Ian?
No, she got it.
Awesome. So, what inspired each of you to join the Peace Corps? And we can start with Ian.
Sure. Okay. So I watched a lot of TV when I was a kid. And so I was a kid a long time ago now. Back in the 70s, there was, you'd watch your TV, you'd watch the commercials. There was really effective propaganda from the Peace Corps. So many Peace Corps commercials, and I know all the slogans, like it's helping people help themselves and the toughest job you'll ever love. So from a very early age, it was clear to me that after college, that's what I wanted to do because I wanted to go live in a different place in the world. I wanted to experience new things. I wanted to like stretch myself a little bit. And I was also motivated by the desire to help other people too. So that's where I started.
Amazing. And Sam?
I know the exact opposite. I had never heard anything about the Peace Corps. I never knew a single Peace Corps volunteer. I was studying psychology undergrad and had a one-track mind towards graduate school and clinical psychology. But my senior years, I was taking the GREs and applying for graduate programs. I really just felt like that wasn't the right path for me anymore. And I happened to attend an AmeriCorps event on campus and started looking into that and stumbled upon the Peace Corps and kind of applied um, on a whim.
Awesome. So, jumping into our next question, I really want to dive into both of your specific experiences and your time in the Peace Corps. But while we're talking about how you got involved, I wanted to ask you what is the process like to join the Peace Corps? How does one go about kind of getting into it?
I think go ahead, Sam, because this was
Sorry.
very different for me
Yeah.
a long time ago. Yeah.
I can share how it was when I applied and maybe similar to Ian's experience, and then a little bit about how the process has changed significantly and what it looks like today. When I applied, and Ian, this might have been similar to you, it was kind of just a general application that you filled out. I can't even remember what the questions were now or what was required of you. And you could indicate like some regional preferences, such as South America, Africa, Asia. But it wasn't like you could say, I want to do this job in this particular country. So after you applied, they review your materials, they interview you, and then depending on what your skill set was, your expertise, and what their current needs were at the time, they offered you a volunteer position. Today, it's very different. Now, if you go on the Peace Corps website and look, you apply for very specific positions in very specific countries. There's pros and cons to that, of course, but people can feel a little bit more reassured that they're not going to be sent to a place that they don't want to be, and that they can be doing a position that they're really passionate about.
Yeah, so it's very different these days. So I wanted to go to Nepal, like just because I like mountains. So I was all about that. And also I'd read some books about Peace Corps volunteers in Nepal. After I was interviewed, they looked at my language skills or lack of language skills, and they said, okay, you took 2 years of French in high school, so we're going to send you to Africa. So I was like, okay, that's great. And then when they finally gave me the assignment, it was none of the above. It was a country I'd honestly never even heard of in these little tiny islands in the South Pacific. So it was like these, like when I applied, you really had to be flexible and take what they gave you. And these days, it's like Sam said, it's much more targeted.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, Ian, while we're on the topic of you mentioned where you ended up being, doing your volunteer time. So, where were you? What were you doing? What did your day-to-day look like as a volunteer in your time in the Peace Corps?
That's like I could spend an hour answering that. So I'll give you the greatest hit. So I was in the Solomon Islands, which is a country in the South Pacific. So if you start in Australia and hop north, you'll get to Indonesia. And if you hop east, you'll get to Papua New Guinea. And if you keep hopping that way, you'll get to the Solomons. It's a very small country. The total population at the time was about 300,000 people. In the entire country, there was one traffic light. So it's a bunch of islands. So like the infrastructure is not all about roads. It's all about like boats going from place to place. The only job I was really qualified for coming straight out of college was as a science major, I could teach math and science, and that's what I did. So in this country, all the secondary schools are boarding schools, and the students travel from very far to live at these schools and to learn. So I lived with the students at the school, and I taught math and science to basically middle school and high school kids. My day-to-day life it was awesome. It was fantastic. So this is a tropical island. Like imagine a tropical paradise is basically it. So I lived like by the ocean and I ate coconuts and fish and bought things from the village market. And then I taught a lot too, and I kind of panicked every Sunday night about like, what am I going to do this week? But it's kind of a learn on the job thing, and I really loved working with the students. I really liked teaching. Uh, when I asked when they placed me in the country, they asked like, do you want to be like near other English speaking people, or do you want to be like out there? And I chose the out there. And after about 3 or 4 months, I kind of regretted that because I was way out there. But it all ended up being okay. Looking back on it, it was a very enriching experience for me personally. When I was in it, it was really hard.
Yeah, amazing. And Sam, how about you? What was your time like in the Peace Corps?
Yeah, so I served in Ghana, a country in West Africa, specifically in the Volta region. How Peace Corps works is that, Ghana, I can speak for specifically. Obviously, there's a major metropolitan city, Accra, that's, a hub for business and economics and education and all of those things. And that's not where volunteers serve. We're sent to the most like remote parts of the countries typically. I think for most Peace Corps experiences, you're typically with your cohort of volunteers for the first 3 months while you do like an in-depth training. That could be language training, it could be training on your job specific, sort of expectations. I was also teaching, so we learned about lesson plans, we learned about the education system in Ghana. And then for the 2 years of your service, you're sent to your site placement. So I was also pretty far out there. I think the closest volunteer to me was about an hour ride away. So I was in a very small village. My day to day, I was hired to teach math because I had a math minor on top of my psychology major. But throughout the 2 years, I taught math, science, English, and information computers technology. So pretty busy with teaching, lesson planning, grading. I am a pretty like introverted person, but I made the commitment to myself that every single day, like I would meet a new person, I would go to a different little shop to buy my lunch or dinner that day. I never cooked while I was there. I ate like exclusively local food, which was amazing. Ghana is a mix. The southern part of Ghana is pretty tropical, and the northern part is more arid desert type climate. But I was in a more tropical area, so also had a lot of fish and tropical fruits. And the local food was awesome. I spent a lot of time with my teacher friends, became very close with them, and would spend like nights and weekends with them typically. And then I got involved in other things in my community. So I worked with some other, my local counterparts to do like an HIV/AIDS prevention program through a soccer like a sports lens, which was really fun for the children and young adults. And then I also did a bicycle project through a nonprofit organization where the community members, I think, paid maybe 40 local currency, 40 Ghanaian cedis, and that got them a donated bicycle. And they came in this huge truckload to my community, and they spent a whole week there, and they taught people everything you could ever need to know about a bicycle, including not only how to ride it, but also repair it and service it yourself. So I was very involved in a lot of other things besides teaching.
Amazing. And I think it's really cool that you guys were both teachers. I think you'll be able to answer this next question very well. Obviously, here in America, we have a very specific kind of culture of education. Like American school is very a certain type of way. So I was wondering if you could both speak on any particular cultural differences that you experienced in general and specifically in education as well while you were there. And we can start with Sam because you just finished, and then we'll jump back to Ian.
Sure. A lot of it, was very typical to an American school system. The national language of Ghana is English, so I taught in English. However, out in the remote villages, the speaking, reading, writing English level of the students was not the same that you might experience in the larger cities. So it was a challenge to try to teach in English when my students didn't always, I'm talking about Pythagorean theorem and, states of matter. That's challenging if it's more than just like your typical conversations in English. So that was tough. But it's, standard curriculum and testing that, would expect here. I think some of the biggest differences for me was, they wear uniforms across the country, regardless of like what school you're in. So that was different. It wasn't just reserved for like private schools like you might see in the US. And then I think that maybe the hardest thing for me to adjust to, and a big tenet of the Peace Corps, is that you aren't there to change their culture or to try to enforce your culture onto them. So you're really there to like learn and understand and, yes, share about your own culture, but not in a way that's meant to force that onto the host community that you're with. So in Ghana, corporal punishment is still commonplace in the school system. So that could look like different types of punishment that you might not see in an American school system. And that was challenging to try to navigate and at times like be witness to and really not be able to step in or intervene because that wasn't my role.
Yeah, so I'll echo a lot of things that Sam said. For the Solomon Islands, the official language was also English. It's a former English colony. But I quickly learned that even though you teach in English, it doesn't mean that anything that you're saying is being received or understood. So because it was a boarding school though, I would teach in English during the day, but I'd hang out at the library in the evenings and then go over things as best to my ability in the language that they're more used to speaking. The other kind of unique thing about the Solomons is that because they were a British colony, their school system was based on the British model, which if you're familiar at all with Harry Potter, it's kind of like that. So they have the uniforms, they have the different houses, they have the head boy and the head girl and the prefects. And it's kind of a residential thing. So it was an interesting experience to me who had the childhood of having a home and having a school be two different places. Whereas there, it's like I said before, these are all boarding schools. So students come live at the school. And I think the other major difference is that there are more kids in the Solomons than there are spots for schools. There are fewer school spots than there are for kids. So every single one of the students tests into the schools, which is another challenge in terms of culture. Like ideally, you'd be educating everybody, but there's not enough space for that. And the other thing too is that there's kind of a hierarchy of schools. So the fancier schools get filled up first with the kids with the highest test scores. And as you move away from the center of the country, you get kind of the less desirable ones with kids with lower test scores. So being pretty remote was like the last of the students who were able to test into schools. So it was a challenge, but it was also really fun. Every student there was really motivated to learn because another big difference is that they were paying for schools. Their family was on the hook for tuition. It wasn't like free public education as it is in this country. So they were super motivated and enthusiastic.
Yeah, incredible. So you've both mentioned this briefly while we were having our discussion here, the challenges that you faced, and I want to dive into that more and talk about that. And we can start with Ian. What are some specific challenges that you faced? And you can go in depth or just kind of a list, however you prefer to share, but challenges you faced in your time volunteering.
Yeah, so there are little challenges and big challenges. And going into it, I kind of thought they would be swapped. So I thought I'm an independent person, I'm self-reliant, I can do this. But my biggest challenge was not having anybody from my own culture within a couple of days of me. And I didn't think that would be a problem with me, but it turned out to be the biggest problem because of like the way I just felt like there was a big gap between, and I was trying my best and they were trying my best too, but fundamentally there was a big cultural gap and a gap in understanding. Like I didn't quite understand the motivations of the people around me, and they certainly didn't understand like who I was as a person. And that was hard to me. Like I felt like I didn't really know anybody really well. Whereas the little problems were like the lack of plumbing, the lack of running water, the giant spiders, the snakes living in your house, the mosquitoes, the malaria. Those are all manageable things. And I thought those were going to be the biggest challenges, but they were not.
Awesome. And Sam, how about you?
I certainly had similar challenges. Also had malaria and a number of parasites and other health issues. And the Peace Corps does a really good job of like taking care of you and keeping you safe as best they can. I think for me, the biggest thing, Ian, you talked about how you really enjoyed teaching. I found that that is not a particular passion of mine, not something I want to do day in and day out anyways, not in that type of like formal structured type of classroom setting. I think the added context of like I could spend days in the classroom and feel pretty confident that, you know, the students I was teaching just weren't receiving the information I was sharing. And that was nothing, that wasn't my fault, that wasn't their fault. It was just the system we were in. And it was still pretty like frustrating and defeating. And, you know, I felt pretty helpless to be forced to like teach it in a language that I knew they weren't understanding. And um, you know, of course, there are those students who um, are the exception to that and went on and are currently like in college and beyond that, you know, I still have contact with. But for the majority of my students, it was just tough to try to do that. That's why I was really interested in kind of getting involved in like the after school programs and things outside of the formal teaching. So I felt like I could still connect with them and build those relationships and share different knowledge in other ways.
Amazing. And I actually, you made me think of a new question here, Sam. You mentioned that you had to teach this system and in the language that they weren't necessarily understanding. I know in the US, teachers often experience a lot of pressure from their districts and their schools to teach a certain curriculum at a very certain speed. And I was wondering if is it similar in the Peace Corps? Is there a kind of like strict kind of regimen you have to follow, or do you have time to slow down and try to, help students understand more, or do you really kind of have to crack down on that curriculum?
Yeah, there's tests and they take the tests at the end of the year and you're given a curriculum and you have to teach towards that test, and there's really not a lot of time to slow down or focus in on certain topics because for those who might be able to pass the test, you want to make sure you get them all the information so that they can be successful.
Gotcha. And Ian, anything to add on that topic?
No, it sounds like it's a very similar situation. So they need to test to get into the school. They also need to test to get to the next step. So from middle school to high school and from high school to college. So there's a lot of pressure that the kids put them on themselves, but also that's kind of externally put on the teachers that you, like Sam said, you have to cover all the material. And I think that's something that actually, if you think about it, we face in this country too. Like
Absolutely, yeah.
there's everybody learns differently. There's geographic differences, and kind of a national or even a state level curriculum is not always appropriate. And there's always this tension about the things that you are supposed to be doing from higher up versus, oh, I got some balloons, versus the things that with your, because of your experience and because of your knowledge and your relationship with the students, you like, these are the things that you know are maybe more appropriate for what they know. And there's always like that tension of how to balance those two things.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So we are approaching the close of our time. We're not quite there yet, but before we get there, I did want to ask, so 27 months, right? You spend in the Peace Corps. That's, a lot of time. And Ian, you mentioned you went right out of college. That's a big gap to, not be kind of pursuing the career you went to school for. So I wanted to ask, first, is Peace Corps like a paid position? Are you compensated for your time volunteering there? And then, that's a lot of time to spend not necessarily pursuing your specific career. How did the Peace Corps contribute to your career journey, and how did it get you to where you ended up?
Okay, so looking at it from the perspective of a 20-something, like 27 months is a significant chunk, a significant fraction of your life. And it seems kind of daunting. Looking at it from the perspective of a 50-year-old, it's just this little tiny time, right? And it's just such a small part of your life, but in terms of the experience and the enrichment, it's just like super dense, super packed there. So those 27 months are packed with things that, at least for me, have shaped me into the person that I am now, that I would not have gotten necessarily if I would have stayed here. And your other question was, do they pay you? Sam can weigh in on that too, but when I was in the Peace Corps, they pay you a local wage. They pay you enough to survive at a pretty comfortable level in the local currency, which is, because of differences in countries, is not very much in absolute terms like in the US. One thing they did do, which was really valuable, is two things. One is, depending on what kind of loans you have, they'll cancel some of your loans. If you have federal loans, like I got a lot of my loans wiped out, which was cool. The other great thing was they give you what is known as a readjustment allowance, like based on your length of service. They give you quite a bit of dollars to kind of come back and get your feet under you and figure out what the next thing is that you want to do. And in terms of like delay my career or whatever, that totally was a non-issue for me. It might be an issue for other people, but that's like, it's just a drop in the bucket.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, 27 months, agreed. Did seem like a really long time, but looking back, it really went by so fast. And when I talk to students that are interested in the Peace Corps, or maybe like are weighing that against another service organization, one of the things that I always like to share is that you don't realize how long it takes to truly become integrated into a community. When I first arrived in Ghana, within the first couple months, or maybe the first year, I would be invited to weddings and baby events and funerals. And I thought it was because, oh, wow, I'm really a part of this community. But more than anything, it was them inviting me to share their culture with me and to make me feel included. And I didn't realize until closer to the end of my service, when I was being invited to these, weddings and funerals and other special life events, because these are people who I'd actually grown really close to in 2 years. And I couldn't believe how big of a difference it was from my first year to my second year, and the relationships I built, and the way that I was, a part of the community as much as anyone can be in 2 short years, which it really is. It's short in retrospect, and it goes by really fast. Yes, you do get paid, just like Ian described. It's enough to get by comfortably. You're not saving money per se, but they do either defer your loans, or, again, depending on what type you have, you might get some loan forgiveness. If you're enrolled in a public service loan forgiveness program, the months of your service count towards your 120 qualifying payments, which is really nice. And then when I finished, like Ian said, you get this readjustment allowance. When I finished my service in 2014, I think it was something just short of $7,000. But that was 10 years ago. And I know for a fact it's gone up a few $1,000s since then. So they really try to make it so that it doesn't feel like a financial strain to be able to go and serve and give that, amount of time. People serve at all ages. It sounds like Ian and I both went like right after undergrad. I was literally on a plane like 2 weeks after college graduation.
Wow.
But there were volunteers in my cohort all the way up through their 70s who had retired, or other people who took long-term leaves from their jobs to be able to do this. Yeah.
Amazing. And we've touched on this briefly throughout our discussion here, but how's your time in the Peace Corps, and how did your time in the Peace Corps influence your perspective on the world and your life decisions afterward? And just how did Peace Corps affect you?
Yeah. Um, I feel like this is probably true from a lot of Peace Corps countries. I hear this when I talk to other returned Peace Corps volunteers, that typically the way of life, specifically the speed of life, is just so much slower in the countries that are hosting us. Um, I felt like going through, K through 12 and then college, I already mentioned having this like one track mind towards graduate school and clinical psychology. I never had time to like stop and think. But suddenly, when you're taken out of that environment that's just go, 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 so individualistic, you don't really have time to stop and think. But in Ghana, I felt like I had a lot of time to think. When you don't have electricity 90% of the time and you don't have some of those other distractions, it really made me think about what I want for in my life and what I want to do next. And it made me realize that I didn't want to pursue a career in clinical psychology. I ended up, after I returned home, I worked for a year, but then I went back to graduate school for higher education and student affairs administration, which has brought me to Ithaca College now. Um, I feel like my time in the Peace Corps has opened up a lot of doors for me in terms of like networking and who I've met and been able to connect with. But it also has, the personal growth. I think Ian, you touched on this a little bit, but I feel like I really have a sense of like how far my boundaries can stretch and what I'm capable of, and the challenges that I'm able to overcome. So I feel like it's really opened mental doors for myself of positions that I could consider or put myself in because I can do hard things.
Awesome. Yeah, a couple of things. So I think, like Sam said, you realize how many hours there are in a day there that just fly by here. Or so our days are just filled with, I don't know what they're filled with, but they they just go by. Whereas there, I had so much time. Um, like I read all the books that you're supposed to read. I read War and Peace and Moby Dick. I read all the thick books. I wrote like, I counted them one day. I wrote like 450 letters to people back home, and I still have bags full of stuff that they wrote me. And like, when's the last time you actually sat down and wrote a letter to somebody on a piece of paper? Uh, I learned, so I majored in music. I didn't know how to play guitar. I learned how to play guitar there. Like I could practice for 90 minutes a day, and I got really good. And it's just like a luxury that we don't have here. A couple of other things. You learn that there is much more than one right answer to all the questions. Like there's more than one right answer of what is the best way to live or what your values should be. And I think like it's getting worse and worse in this country. Like we all assume we have the right answer, the right way to do things, and just to be open to other perspectives that are completely novel, I think is a really valuable experience. And then finally, I have my like college friends, I have my growing up friends, but my closest friends are the set of Americans that went with me to the Peace Corps, that we did training together. We did like mid-service conferences together. A lot of us stayed on to train the next cohort. And that's like my like tightest group of friends to this day, many, many years later.
Amazing. And we are approaching the end of our time. We were already approaching before. Now we're even closer. Before we close out our session here today, I just wanted to ask both of you for a brief piece of advice for somebody who is wanting to join or is joining the Peace Corps. One thing maybe you wish you'd known before joining, or just any kind of advice you have.
Yeah, I think something that I touched on before, like the things that you think are going to be hard the Peace Corps already knows about that, and there are systems in place to manage that. And then the things that you don't think about as being hard, those are the challenges that you face, at least in my experience.
I really want to highlight what Ian said about there's just so many right answers to different problems we face as a society. And I definitely learned that there are just so many beautiful and unique ways of life and culture. And it really takes you outside of that, like, even if someone's not intentionally trying to be ethnocentric, that's the way that we're kind of socialized in this country, to think that, you know, we're superior and have better answers and solutions. And that's simply just not the reality. And until you really spend a good amount of time in a different culture and a different way of life, it can be hard to see that. But I think my biggest piece of advice is to be really thoughtful about the decision to join the Peace Corps or not. It's not for everybody, and that's okay. But different from other organizations that, you know, see a community or a country and they decide, oh, we think this place needs a school or a computer lab or a well. And they go in and they do that without really collaborating or communicating with the host country. The Peace Corps is very much the opposite. Prior to a Peace Corps volunteer being placed in a community, that community has spent sometimes years going through like a very strenuous application process to, you know, say why they want to volunteer and what specific sector, how they're going to support that volunteer. They have to find accommodations to make sure that they can live safely and comfortably. They have to identify a host country national counterpart person in that field. So like mine was a teacher counterpart. So by the time you get there, they've really invested a lot of time and energy into your arrival. And volunteers do leave service early for a number of reasons, which are oftentimes very legitimate. But when they do, it can have a really significant effect on the community because of how much they've invested into your arrival. So I would just say, like, prior to doing that, maybe do a little bit more research than I did, not on a whim. Be really thoughtful about your decision. And thankfully, you know, it worked out for me. But I would encourage others to just put a little bit more thought into it.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for joining us in the Career Corner today. Is there anything else that you want to add before we close out here?
Yeah, if anybody out there has any questions about Peace Corps, just feel free to reach out.
And do you have a
Yes.
contact, both of you guys, if you want to drop an email or anything?
Yeah, it's just iwoods at Ithaca, IWOODS.
And you can also reach me at Elibiary@ithaca.edu or at careers@ithaca.edu. It's cool being in the Career Center because I also have the contact of our regional Peace Corps recruiter. So not only can I share about my personal experience, but I could connect students with the recruiter for this area, for those who are really seriously considering the Peace Corps.
Incredible. Well, again, thank you both so much for joining us today. And folks at home, you do not have to wait for our next episode to get career guidance. You can visit drop-in hours Monday through Friday, 11 to 2 in Muller Faculty Center 101. I'm Lukas Kauffman, and this has been Career Corner.